All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I think we're live now. This is the VR Downloaded. We're broadcasting live from virtual reality in a studio built by you. We can see your comments down on our tablets here. So, Anthony, Onakazi, Majestic, Paradise, thank you all for tuning in. We can respond to your comments, questions, and we've got the meta avatars right now. Stevie the TV to show videos and photos. And that's about it. What are you up to this week, Heaney?
What am I up to this week? That's a great question. It really depends on what kind of VR news drops, as always.
Yeah, and we've got a sponsorship this week by Les Mills Body Combat. This podcast was sponsored by Les Mills Body Combat. It brings the body combat experience to your VR headset with an extensive workout portfolio, coaching mechanics, and different intensities. You can get it on the Oculus Store now, and there should be a description in our link description box below. All right, Heaney, let's get right into it. Meta's revenue and losses. Meta reported about $2.3 billion in 2021 revenue from Reality Labs. That's roughly in the same ballpark as the $2 to $3 billion that it reportedly cost Facebook to purchase the Oculus startup in 2014. What did it cost Meta to get here, Heaney?
Well, as you say, in 2014, Zuckerberg acquired then startup Oculus for somewhere north of $2 billion. We know that the exact figure depends on whether you're including some of the compensation that was given to founders at the time and details like that, but it's somewhere in the realm of $2 to $3 billion. And since then, Zuckerberg has been spending billions of dollars every year on VR research and development. And last year, he even told investors, this year we are intending to spend in the order of 10 billion on this. And now we come along to this earnings report. And I guess we should start by saying what's significant about this outside the VR world, and that this is the first ever time that Facebook did not grow its user base. Every single quarter since Facebook's inception, it has grown the number of users on its platform, except for now where it ever so slightly contracted. And on the scale of this graph that goes all the way from 2008 to 2021, you can barely even see the contraction because it's so small in the grand scheme of things. But that little stop in growth, that kind of change from growing to contraction, is what has caused the massive share price decrease that you may have seen reported this week. And some people have kind of wrongly conflated that by saying the issue there is that it was too much spending on VR and AR research. But no, it all really does come down to that stop in growth. And if you look at Facebook's share price over the past 7 years, you can see that it's actually had a very significant impact as we come here. It's down lower than it's been since 2019, though, from some of the reporting, you would expect that it's even lower than that. But that's sort of why we've heard in the news that Zuckerberg's heavily pivoting the conventional side of his company to try and go into TikTok style short videos instead of the kind of current content that they're using.
Now, I feel like Reels and Instagram and the competition with TikTok is sort of like a short-term existential threat to like Facebook's core business. But this period is also the period when Facebook turned off kind of like one of its cornerstone features on the Facebook platform. That's the automatic, or not necessarily automatic, but the face tagging feature that is kind of cornerstone to uploading any image to Facebook's profile. They turned off some significant feature there. Do you think that had any effect on how that existing social network is tuned for growth?
Well, I do think that's unlikely. I think what they're trying to do there was just get ahead of regulators, because we've seen Facebook have so many of these scandals in the past where they're kind of years behind regulator and they end up being caught far before they've even really thought about the consequences. And there's a lot of kind of clamor in regulators across the United States and in Europe and elsewhere in the world about kind of curtailing the use of facial recognition technology before it gets out of control. So I think, Zuckerberg and the other executives of Facebook are just trying to stay out of that one. But one of the things I do think it's important to note is that while Facebook's active user base did kind of stagnate and is now slightly in decline, which is a significant event, the company actually did increase their revenue significantly between 2020 and 2021. It went up from 86 billion to 118 billion dollars, and their profits too went up from 32.7 billion to 46.8. So we're still talking about a very profitable company that is still able to extract a lot of money through advertising, targeted advertising revenue. But it's just the fact that now that it's no longer the kind of popular social app that people are flocking to, it's going to be in decline for a while. And the question we're kind of wondering is, as that traditional side of its business goes into decline, how long is it going to be until the VR and AR side of the business becomes material? And as you said, the headline figure here is that in 2021, they made $2.3 billion from their Reality Labs division. And that's Quest and that's Portal, essentially. There's a few other things it does, but it's essentially Quest and Portal. But if you compare that to the years before, that's double what it was in 2020. And 2020 was double what it was in 2019. So every year, the revenue that this new section of Meta's business generates is doubling. Now, that's only 3 years of data, so we can't really extrapolate out from that and say what we think is going to happen in the long term. But just for the sake of kind of discussion, if that did continue to double year on year, it would actually cross over the traditional business in 2027. If we take a much more pessimistic outlook on it, on the VR and AR section's growth, and say it's only going to increase by 50% each year, then even by 2031, it would cross over the main business. So that's really what we're seeing here. We're seeing the start of the death of Meta's traditional business and the start of the rapid growth of its new kind of replacement business that it markets as metaverse, but it's really just virtual and augmented reality.
Yeah, of course. The name of the company is now Meta Platforms, and there's multiple platforms here. And I think, yeah, what you're getting at is those tentpole platforms that we know the company as, Facebook itself. Messenger is a separate platform to that. That they've sort of carved out as its own thing. And there's Instagram and these others, and Facebook being this core platform that could have a steep decline. Heaney, we know that Facebook and Meta are planning to do Cambria this year. If they ship that in this calendar year, what does that do to kind of like the cost figures up here and potentially the revenue figures?
Yeah, so I think that that cost is very important to bring up because, we did say that they made 2.3 billion in revenue from the VR and AR division, but that actually resulted in a loss of 10.2 billion dollars. So you can do the maths very quickly there and see that that means that their costs, and that includes the cost of making Quest 2, the cost of running the store, and all of the research and development costs, as well as all of their content costs of funding VR games and acquiring studios like Supernatural, that means that that totals up to $12.5 billion. Now, what that kind of shows you is this division of Meta, this AR and VR project, is still nowhere near being profitable. It is still something where they are pumping in significantly, like 5 times more money than they're actually getting in from it, 6 times actually more money than they're actually getting into it. So Zuckerberg clearly believes, although, on this show we've been saying this for years as we've watched it, clearly believes that this is going to be such a big opportunity in the long term that it's worth spending enormous amounts of money in the short term. Cambria, that comes later this year, Project Cambria, the high-end headset they've announced, is unlikely to be material in any of these numbers. If John Carmack is right about his assessment, it's going to be something that sells 1/10 of the units of Quest 2. So even if it's double or triple the cost, it's not really going to be a massive game changer in terms of revenue. But what it does kind of do is set up a showcase of the technology. And whereas, Quest 2 is still this very heavy headset that lacks the features like eye and face tracking to make avatars really socially compelling yet, Cambria is going to be that kind of showcase where Facebook can say, to investors, to others, and even to those inside the company, here's what we can do in a couple of years in a headset that's sold like Quest, but for now we can do it at a kind of high price point and show what's coming and what's possible.
Yeah, anything else on that subject, Heaney, or should we get on to the next bit of news?
Nothing else than that. I think it'll be really interesting to watch how the market reacts to the upcoming earnings calls throughout this year, whether we're going to see Facebook continue to kind of contract. What a lot of analysts have been saying is that it's not actually that people are deleting Facebook any more than they ever were. It's not that they're losing or bleeding losers. The issue is that they've actually run out of space to expand into. And if you followed the tech news a few years ago, you may notice that Facebook was trying to fund these free internet projects in India and in parts of Africa for you know the purpose of just finding more users to grow into. Facebook right now, even at their current kind of uh, contraction, we're still talking about a monthly active user base of almost 3 billion people. So they just don't have people left that have a smartphone or a laptop and haven't had Facebook yet to actually add to the number. So the real question is, what is Zuckerberg going to do about that? Is VR and AR the only kind of thing he's got left in his idea box to get out of this situation? Or
Mm.
is there going to be kind of other big moves that we see?
Well, I think this chart is interesting because they've also put, Zuckerberg himself has also put VR on and AR on this path to try to reach this marker here of 1 billion users. And it's really interesting to think that this platform could get eaten by the effort to get this platform. Because I think Mark Zuckerberg would probably argue, Bosworth over there at Meta would probably argue, that the first company to reach this number with an AR or VR headset or both is going to get to the next few billion first, is I think the assumption, right, Heaney?
Yeah, it's the fact that he's going to move into a business that will potentially have less users, at least any time in the foreseeable future, but where each user will be more valuable and they'll actually be kind of paying money rather than just acting as a vessel for targeted advertising. So it will be, if Zuckerberg is able to pull this shift off over the next decade, it will be a radical transformation in his business and a completely different business model. Although we have heard that they still do want to continue this idea of targeted advertising even into VR and AR. And so that could allow them to, if they're going to use that to subsidize hardware prices in the long term, to maybe push past 1 billion users. Their long term goal, I'm sure, is to go all the way to what they have today, but in VR and AR. Whether they actually get anywhere near there, that's a completely different question.
Yep. All right, let's get on to this next news with Microsoft and Samsung. Let's figure out what's going on with the HoloLens, Heaney. So there's a new report from Business Insider suggesting that morale at Microsoft's mixed reality teams, or in those teams, is being affected by, quote, confusion and strategic uncertainty as different factions argue. What's going on here over at Microsoft? What's reportedly going on there between Microsoft and Samsung, Heaney?
Let me see if I can bring up a image here of Kipman and his HoloLens first. We're very excited to eventually integrate the track to keyboard SDK here. I just realized, there we go. Yeah, so right now when we're searching for images with our tablet, we're using a kind of VR touch interface, which is any of you who try to type in VR know sucks. But one of the things we'll cover later today is that Meta is actually introducing a track to keyboard SDK. So hopefully searching for these images will be a lot faster soon. Anyway, in the meantime, the report from Insider, formerly Business Insider, if you're wondering what outlet that was, is suggesting that there is this serious strategic uncertainty within Microsoft that is kind of really derailing its mixed reality plans and causing lowered morale within its mixed reality teams. And there's two major divisions here. And when I say divisions, I don't mean parts of a company. I mean as in conflicts within Microsoft. The first one is about whether they should be a hardware provider or to focus really on being a software provider for VR and AR in the future. And the next kind of question is, if they are going to be a hardware provider, should it be them producing these devices or should they be partnering with companies like Samsung? So reportedly, according to this report, last year, the HoloLens 3 was cancelled in favor of a partnership with Samsung, where Samsung would be the producer of the hardware, where Microsoft would just be focusing on the software. And the goal here, according to the report and kind of Microsoft CEO's long-term goal in this space, is that they would essentially become the Android. They would become the company that provides the system software, the platform, the store that any device maker, be it Samsung or LG or any of the companies that would make consumer electronic devices today, can load on. And so any of these companies can then jump into the market without having to be stuck in the current situation we're in, where if someone wants to make a Quest competitor, or even if someone wants to make an AR headset competitor, there's this big issue of how do they build out all the software? How do they get the content? How do they have a platform with all the features that people want to use? And Microsoft's hoping, apparently, according to this report, that they can kind of fill that gap. But their actual employees aren't so interested in that. They want to really do what they do best and push forward the hardware and the software at the same time, just like they've been doing with HoloLens 1 and 2.
Interesting. Yeah, James O'Loughlin there in our comments pointing out that Business Insider hasn't had the most reputable track record amongst outlets, and they've gone by this new branding, Insider, and they are like a subscription-based service. So this article was kind of behind a paywall behind the subscription-based service, which is meant to, by and large, pay for journalists to go and do this research. And in this article, they've cited 20 plus current and former employees of Microsoft as being talked to. Now, when a journalist goes out and reaches out to these people, the balance of whether those are, 15 former employees and 5 current employees could have an effect on the overall tone of the piece, right? Or if it's 10 and 10, hearing from people who have a vested interest in the future plans of this team is completely different than a person who left and went somewhere else because the team wasn't working out for them. And of course, all we have to go off of with this particular reporting is sources, right? We don't get more specific there on most of these things on whether it's current or former employees. Microsoft, of course, has a long history here of supporting the term mixed reality, sort of citing that old research-based chart about AR and VR being at different ends of a spectrum called mixed reality, and this sort of vision of having one platform that encompasses both of these things. But here we are a couple of years later, and Meta has its Quest platform, and we have what may be the announcement of at least another product line, if not a whole nother platform, as soon as they get their AR ambitions a little bit more solid. Where is this all going with regards to Microsoft? Are they, do they have enough strength as the operating system of PCs to kind of like play a really defining role in this next era of computing, or do they have to have the hardware there to make it happen, Heaney?
That is a really great question. Steve Jobs used to always quote a very famous Alan Kay quote, which was, people who are serious about software should make their own hardware. And we've actually seen in recent years companies like Google and Microsoft, who for a very long time resisted going into the hardware business, ship these products that do push forward the hardware and the software at the same time. With Microsoft, it's the whole Surface line of products. With Google, it's the Pixel line. And it seems like there's a kind of consensus now that if you really want to build cutting edge products that go into a completely new territory and are able to kind of compete against integrated companies like Apple, you do have to kind of push forward both hardware and software at the same time. But there is also the issue that dedicated hardware companies like Samsung tend to be able to do better hardware and kind of more innovation and ship at bigger scale. And they have access to all of their kind of retailer network. They are deeply integrated in the supply chain. And so you do kind of get these Silicon Valley companies make mistakes with their hardware that kind of ruins their reputation. And it's definitely the safer bet to go with something like Samsung. And it definitely is a much bigger opportunity in terms of Microsoft wanting to build a business here that brings in billions and of profit, not just revenue. But it is really a question of how well that can really work in such a completely new and fast moving industry like VR and AR. One of the interesting things from Stuart's report, and just to kind of talk about the legitimacy of this report, as you say, there's 20 apparent sources. Business Insider does have its reputational issues, though, as far as I'm aware, Alex Stewart does have a good reputation for accuracy when it comes to reporting specifically on Microsoft. Stewart isn't someone who's just reporting on all kinds of topics. As far as I understand, her specialty is on Microsoft, and she lives in the close vicinity and does have known contacts within that company. So I wouldn't write the report off as nonsense, though it may not accurately represent the situation of all employees, including those that wouldn't have wanted to talk to her, as you kind of point out. But one of the things she claims in the report is that the upper executives don't exactly have full faith in the AR and VR projects at Microsoft at all, where she has quoted apparently the chief marketing officer just before the pandemic said that HoloLens was a nice demo project for marketing, but it was a rounding error when it comes to the actual business value. She's also quoted the chief financial officer. Sorry, not quoted. She's also reporting that the chief financial officer has asked for more focus on things that will actually make business sense and bring in large amounts of profit. So if you kind of take this picture together where they're not sure where they want to be in terms of hardware and software, their employees are not happy with the strategic vision of the executives, and there's this kind of open question about whether HoloLens 3 is still going to be a product line. You can see why last month the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg reported that Microsoft's been dealing with significant employees leaving, defecting, whatever you want to call it, to go and work at Meta. Because if you're comparing a company like this that they clearly just aren't sure yet what their strategy even is, compared to Zuckerberg, who, even if the basis behind it isn't as solid as Zuckerberg would like us to believe, he's coming out here confidently telling investors, employees, and the whole world, we're building the metaverse, we're going to ship products, we're going to build everything, come work for us, and there's no question here about whether we're going to do it or not. You can see that Microsoft's going to have a tough time retaining the talent that they want to be able to build the ambitions that they have here.
The most interesting bit that I saw in that report from Business Insider was them talking about, the sources talking about Kipman's ability to sell a vision to those upper executives. And the question I think that's being raised by the article overall is whether Kipman still has kind of their backing in their next steps in building these pieces. Microsoft, of course, did do this massive acquisition quite recently of Activision Blizzard, and that's going to be enormous, playing out over time with the Xbox Games Pass. But it's hard to see how that directly relates to VR and AR in the near term if they're investing that much in sort of games that aren't even on drawing boards yet, that might get built a couple years down. But like, how does that relate to this vision of building hardware? And I think the key thing I want to talk about is I did sit down with Kipman years ago and had an interview about the HoloLens, because we have to remember Microsoft and the HoloLens AR standalone is, it takes a place in the market as the first major standalone available for business buyers. And it kind of, it was marketed very early on with flashy demos for things like Minecraft or Halo, but it never has been close to that from a consumer standpoint, because costs and the user experience just doesn't make sense for end consumer users. But I remember sitting down with Kipman and talking about this end vision that they had in naming this the mixed reality spectrum, where you would eventually have a device that could start out as transparent and the lens would go fully opaque automatically or dynamically for you. Heaney, are we finding that is actually going to play out? Is that actually going to happen anytime soon?
So I think it's very interesting to bring up this idea of targeting consumers. And you talked about how when HoloLens was first shown, a lot of the demos were of games that were things like Minecraft. And that is actually the other aspect of this report that we haven't talked about yet, and I really meant to bring up, is that as well as this conflict between should Microsoft build hardware or focus on the software, the other huge point of contention is reportedly, should they continue to focus on businesses or should they expand to consumers? Because HoloLens 2 is a successful product in the enterprise market. It's a very successful product in the military market, given the current US Army contract of $10 billion to build what is essentially a customized HoloLens 3 with a wider field of view than this. But they're kind of, with all that gravy train money coming in and businesses finding this a useful thing and that market growing steadily, it doesn't seem that Microsoft executives have a big appetite to jump into the consumer market and compete with the likes of Apple and Meta in the long term. And that's, over the past 10 years, we've really seen Microsoft decide that why would it bother to compete in the consumer market, which it never seems to quite get as well as the other companies, when it can take this massive enterprise market that those other companies conversely have never really got. Apple has never been a company that really gets enterprise customers. Meta has a very small history of attracting enterprise customers. It has a workplace product, but it's nowhere near as popular as Slack or Teams. Whereas Microsoft, that's been its bread and butter. That's what grew Microsoft to $1 trillion company. It didn't do that through consumers. It did it through enterprise. And apparently, when they hired in 2020 one of Apple's lead engineers for the iPhone, iPad, and Apple Watch, they have become dissatisfied, apparently, according to this report, by Microsoft's lack of desire to really jump into the consumer market. And that seems to be one of those things that's also bleeding them talent. These engineers want to work on products that ship at huge scale and that households will know, and that you might bump into someone and they say that they've bought, just as a Meta engineer might currently encounter with a Quest 2. But while these products are going to bring a lot of value to enterprise, it is a different experience to be shipping a product to consumers. But while we bring up Kipman, we should note his tweet that just after this report dropped, Kipman tweeted out, "Don't believe what you read on the internet. HoloLens is doing great, and if you search said internet, they also said we had cancelled HoloLens 2, which last I checked, we shipped with success." Now, I checked into this claim to see exactly what this meant, and I think Kipman's being not slightly representing this as it was. The reports that came out were that they had cancelled HoloLens, what would be HoloLens 2, to ship a better version, which had been intended to be HoloLens 3. So the reports were suggesting that what we today call HoloLens 2 was actually HoloLens 3. They didn't say that it had been cancelled. But I note here that nowhere here does Kipman specifically say HoloLens 3 was not cancelled. I replied to this tweet saying, "Can you please confirm that HoloLens 3 was not cancelled last year?" And as you would expect, I did not get a response.
Yeah. If you go and read the story that Heaney wrote on this, describing it, his last line is very clear. This doesn't refute the reporting of Business Insider, even though it kind of appears to kind of say that they're still working on HoloLens technology, which of course they are, right? They're not going to walk away from this market in any way, shape, or form. It's just a matter of figuring out which layers they can effectively compete at. And I think that's kind of the issue. If Meta and Apple are preparing to do devices that kind of demonstrate what these technologies can really do, Microsoft is going to look a little bit behind if they've got all these fundamental technologies like, I don't know, voice translation and voice transcription, object recognition, things that Microsoft should be able to do at scale in a way that only those 2 or 3 or 4 other companies can really do. And if they don't have a device to fundamentally demonstrate these technologies on, then they're sort of using some other company to demonstrate and answering to them. It looks like they're a technology provider for someone else rather than doing their own thing. And I think that's what they're really arguing about, aren't they, Heaney?
Yeah, that does seem to be the big debate here. And I think it's interesting that the report actually claims that Microsoft, despite entering into this apparent partnership with Samsung, is reluctant to give them their core display technology behind HoloLens. And one of Stuart's sources called the partnership a shit show. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out.
I like that. Yeah, that quote in comparison to this little, happy headset emoji. All right, and yeah, I'm seeing Kyle and others talking about glasses in the comments, and I thought that would just be a good time to bring up the fact that I lost the glasses that Facebook sent me. So I've lost the first pair, the Ray-Bans. I don't know. I walked out and they were like in my shirt, and now they're gone. And I'm left wondering whether, like, how do there's no remote. I don't think there's a remote delete that I could find in the settings for that. But I did order a new pair of Ray-Bans because uh, I'm interested in the glasses and how they use them. But what I did, Heaney, is I bought and for Kyle out there, I bought the transitions lenses. I want to test what it looks like to just have normal lenses inside, then walking outside and having them transition a little bit darker, and having a video that records going from indoors to outdoors. I really do love that video recording feature. Did you use it at all, Heaney?
I didn't really use the video record. I took some pictures with it, but yeah, it's an interesting product. For me, I'm actually more interested in the fact that you can take calls on it and listen to music. If you're in a situation where you need to use your hands and you don't really want to have earphones in so that you can talk to other people around you, the idea that you can just very quickly take a call on your glasses is compelling to me. It's a simple kind of little thing, but I find that actually more useful than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, I think that I've also got the AirPods, and I go back and forth between like thinking about the usefulness of each of these devices, and it's so interesting to think of sunglasses as being useful when they're not powered. It's such an interesting difference between AirPods that are like useless if they're not powered at all. Uh, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor again. That's Les Mills Body Combat. That's a new fitness game on Quest. Body Combat is a martial arts inspired workout featured in thousands of gyms globally, and it's now available in VR. You can get it in the Oculus Store now, and we should have a link down in our description for you to get that. All right, Heaney, you ready to get into the next thing? Are we ready to talk the SteamVR hardware survey, or was there something else you wanted to get to first?
I think we can cover that, and we'll cover the Reverb G2 news at the same time. It's related.
Yeah, all right. So the SteamVR hardware survey, we check this every month to see how the breakup is of VR headsets in use on Steam. And it took a couple days into February to update this time. We're not really sure why that is. But Oculus Quest 2, Meta Quest 2, if you want to call it that, accounted for 46.02% of the VR headsets in use on SteamVR. That's an increase of 6.39% over last month. Overall, roughly 2 out of 3 headsets in use on Steam are made by Meta platforms. Heaney, what does it all mean?
Yeah, we've seen one of the largest ever jumps in the history of the Steam hardware survey in terms of Quest 2, now at 46%. So almost 1 in 2 headsets used on Steam VR in January were Quest 2. And as you say, 2 and 3 were either Quests or Rifts. So that's what we're just seeing, a continuation of a trend that we've been following and reporting on for years now, where as Meta releases these multi-purpose headsets that can also connect to your PC at affordable prices in the face of almost no effective competition, they just continue to eat away at the Steam VR market. We're not actually seeing a massively significant growth in the overall percentage of Steam users with VR headsets, though. It's not contracting, but it's been fairly stagnant for quite a while. So the reason you may see that is that the number of PC gamers is growing as fast or faster than the number of VR users. That this doesn't mean that the number of VR users aren't growing. It just means that when you compare the fact that anyone who installs Steam on their laptop is now a Steam gamer, or anyone who throughout the entire pandemic decided, I'm spending a lot of time at home, I might build a PC or buy a gaming laptop, they just became a PC gamer. And the number of people doing that just has either outpaced or matched with VR. It's really the lack of effective competition that's got us to where we are today, though.
Yeah, so Heaney, looking at this chart, we look at it month in and month out. What's going to change this in any significant way, or is it just going to Pac-Man throughout the year? And then, uh, does the Steam Deck affect this chart at all? If you connect a VR headset, a Quest to a Steam Deck, and try running something simple, the most simplest VR experience you can possibly throw at that configuration, is it going to show up in this at all, and how?
Yeah, it would show up, but you can't actually use a Quest on as far as I'm aware, you wouldn't be able to use a Quest on Steam Deck unless you wiped SteamOS and replaced it with Windows, which I don't think a lot of people are going to do, because then you lose out on a lot of the low-level optimizations and the kind of refined interface and system software there. You'd be leaving yourself to a much kind of inferior experience just for VR on a product that realistically isn't powerful enough to run good VR anyway. The Steam Deck works so well because it's a 720p screen. If it was anything higher resolution, it would perform terribly, because in there you basically have a mid-range gaming laptop's hardware. And again, it's a great product because it's doing that in something that you can hold in your hand. But as Valve themselves said, it is not designed for virtual reality performance. So I don't think we're going to see any kind of impact from Steam Deck. The other wider question, when are we going to see this change at all? That's again a great question. What is there on the horizon that would actually ship PC VR headsets that aren't Quests out to people on a scale that would show up here? The closest thing is the HB Reverb G2, which is a $600 headset with high resolution Quest 2, but it's had so many issues and a bad reputation from its controller tracking that it really hasn't grown. And to be clear, on this chart, you'll see it under Windows Mixed Reality, because that's the other issue with the Reverb G2. It doesn't directly talk to SteamVR. You have to go through Windows Mixed Reality and then to SteamVR. But look, we've seen no growth here. In fact, it's contracted. And even the news we have, we might as well just say, because it's a very quick thing to discuss, it's that they're now shipping the enhanced version of the G2 to more countries, and they enhance it by tolling the field of view of the controller. That's not a word. You know what I mean.
No, we'll do it. I like it. We'll go with it, Heaney.
We'll coin that word. If it's not in the dictionary,
Shakespeare, man.
Indeed. Tollinated, they've expanded the field of view of the controller tracking so that you can reach up and bring your controller down to your hips and it'll still be tracked. I think given that they've done that, it is a reasonable alternative to Quest 2. If you were someone who wanted a VR headset for your PC and you didn't want to support Meta, the Reverb G2 is the headset you should go for. I think that's pretty inarguable. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. The one factor that could change things, and this has been speculated about for so long, is that Valve could ship their own headset. Obviously, we have the Index from 2019, but it's $1,000. It's wired. It uses base stations, and the resolution is significantly outdated compared to modern headsets. We could see Valve ship a standalone headset that works standalone like Quest 2, but can also be plugged into your PC. We've heard rumors about that over the past 6 months under the codename Deckard, but there is no rumor or information that suggests that headset is anywhere near launching. In fact, it sounds more to us like this is something that's going to happen next year at the earliest. But there is a possibility that Valve pulls a trick out of the bag and is somehow able to ship this much faster than we thought. If that happens, I could see this market share start to shift. But until then, I think you're right in saying that it's just Quest 2 is going to eat the entire of SteamVR. And it's possible that by this time next year, essentially all of SteamVR usage is just from that one headset, Quest 2.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing I wanted to sort of ask, or what I was getting to with my previous question is, it seems like Valve needs kind of like a 1-2 punch here to have any kind of answer to what Quest is doing. And the 1-2 punch here is to bring in new Steam users to grow the number of total Steam accounts. And that could be done with a Steam Deck, couldn't it, Heaney? Like if Steam Deck is able to move in millions of units, that could grow the number of total Steam accounts out there and have a big effect on kind of like an invisible number here that we don't see reflected here. And then in addition to that, if they had their own Deckard or whatever we want to call it, Steam branded, open PC based standalone to answer Quest 2, those two things would mount a actual resistance to this trend we're seeing, wouldn't it, Heaney?
Maybe, but when we're talking about this overall Steam usage number, I think it's something like 115 million was the last they reported in terms of their monthly active users. So even if Steam Deck is shipping a few million units recently, which given the kind of production estimates, if you order one now, how long it'll take you to get, It doesn't sound like they're shipping these things on a million scale just quite yet. It sounds like they're going to have to ramp that up a while, because we're still in this situation where the global chip supply situation is affecting all of these hardware companies' plans. It's actually probably one of the reasons we're not seeing as many small companies be able to start up. But now that I'm thinking about it, the one headset that could potentially, if they can ship it at scale, change this year is the Lynx R1, because we do know that it will have built-in wired support for PC, and it will likely, when it supports OpenXR at some point, get Guy Godin's virtual desktop software to be able to stream wirelessly from a PC. Again, though, it's going to be one of those things about, is this thing going to ship a few tens of thousands of units, or is it going to ship a few hundreds of thousands of units, or is it actually going to ship millions of units? Because to get to this where Quest 2 is, it's going to have to be in the millions to be reflected on here. So it is a bleak outlook for competition.
Yeah, I think that's the trick here. We really are talking about things like Steam Deck or whatever Valve comes up to answer Quest with being in the millions of units, when Quest is and Meta is looking at tens of millions of units. Like, that's the scale difference these companies could be at different points in time. Thank you so much for our comments. Really good comments down there going on today. I noticed Kyle is in our comments. He went on Between Realities last week with Skiva and Alex. I was just listening to that podcast recently to talk about our correspondence program. I noticed Kyle called the Tollening kind of a stretch. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Dad joke. Even though he's not on the show today, he's still able to get his dad jokes in here through different realities. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, Kyle. Truly.
What are we looking at here, Heaney?
This is Jamie's quick chart of the market share on SteamVR. And as you can see, as we were talking about, 2 and 3 headsets are from Meta. Valve's index has a small share. HTC has kind of got a little bit of the remnants left from when they had the Vive as a popular product from back in 2016, and then the others are essentially irrelevant.
We have the studio here, and I love the studio, but I've asked Heaney for one thing for like two years now, and that's to make this color right here yellow. And Heaney and Jamie refuse, even now, as it's really Pac-Manning its way over the, just...
I was going to
It's
say,
like an ongoing, just...
this time you have to blame Jamie. You can't blame me this time. We've decided to share the responsibility, so you can't actually say it's one of our fault.
All right, I had to run in here, Heaney, to get everything ready for the studio, so I don't have notes beyond this. What is our next topic of conversation, Heaney? What happened over the weekend?
So I think I don't think anything happened over the weekend, unless I'm forgetting something. But what did happen last week was the hand interaction SDK and keyboard SDK shipped. And so let me see if I can find the image for that. It should be here. Unless we want to talk about Horizon Worlds first, should we talk about the 2 pieces of news in one?
Yeah, let's talk about Horizon together. Let's talk about both these things together, because it represents kind of like the really, Meta is up and running in a very kind of almost scheduled way now. They tried to move to a monthly update schedule for their Quest platform last year, and it kind of feels like it's even more than monthly update schedule, because they kind of gate some features behind extra flags to like hold them until they're ready for rollout beyond just the whole update. And so like you could get a new feature almost seemingly every week or every couple weeks with the way it's running now. And we listened to the earnings call very intently, and there was this bit of news that Horizon Worlds kind of has a deadline. That's how I read it anyways, to get in 2D and have a 2D version in 2022. Heaney, I read that and thought that meant that either Horizon Worlds gets running in 2D and is available on smartphones by December 31st of this year, or Mark Zuckerberg's going to seriously consider another way around this. That was my takeaway there. Am I reading too much into it?
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell as to Zuckerberg's exact mood on this, but he was very clear in the earnings call that he wants a version of Horizon Worlds running on mobile this year. And he actually only said Horizon in the earnings call, but based on the fact that he's talking about creators and worlds, it's almost certain he's talking about Horizon Worlds. And just for any of our viewers and listeners who aren't aware of the differences here, Horizon is Meta's general brand for its social VR apps, and there is Horizon Workrooms, which is a meeting software for businesses where you're kind of around a table, you can see your PC screen and cast it. There is Horizon Venues, which is for hosting concerts and comedy events where you kind of have a small audience and usually just a 360 or 180-degree video in front of them. There is Horizon Home, which is launching soon as the replacement for Quest Home, where you'll be able to see your friends as their meta avatars in your home instead of just being in a voice call party. And then there is the fourth and the most ambitious by far, Horizon Worlds, which is essentially Meta's Rec Room competitor. It is in many ways similar to Rec Room in that you can build worlds from within VR and give them functionality through a visual scripting language that's kind of spatially connected in the world. And right now, Horizon World is available in the United States and Canada for adults, apparently, although there's lots of children on it. But we haven't seen it come to other VR platforms. It's only on Quest and Rift, and we haven't even seen it come to the rest of the world. So it's kind of strange that in this very limited beta situation, Zuckerberg's saying that he wants it on mobile so that you're going to be able to access the worlds from Facebook or Instagram apps as well, and probably more over time. And to me, that was the most confusing line about this because it's very unclear what exactly that means. Is he trying to say that he's going to build in an entire 3D engine into the Facebook and Instagram apps? Is he talking about some kind of cloud streaming technology, which we know, Meta actually made a cloud streaming gaming acquisition just under 2 years ago? Or is he just talking about a Horizon mobile app where you can link and share your worlds into the Facebook and Instagram feeds? I don't know which of those he meant, but whatever way it is, what we're looking at here would be a massive expansion of the number of people accessing Horizon worlds, simply given the size of those markets compared. We're talking literally like 3 orders of magnitude more people getting access to these worlds than did before.
Hmm. And then the other news that sort of Meta announced kind of around the same time as all of this is that they're going to institute a personal boundary across, as the default, across all of these spaces that you go into in Horizon. So there's, I think it's more or less 4 feet of space between you and the center of the nearest avatar is going to be kind of what happens if a person tries to enter your personal bubble. Their forward movement is held back, and that's the way that works in that particular system. Um, I've deactivated some of those personal safety features in other places like VR chat in order to have like a play acting experience with another actor where I was scaled to be a smaller person and they were large, and we were doing like a dance in a kitchen as part of this performance that they had planned for VR chat. I've talked about it, and there's an interview on our podcast about it, but it's part of a whole genre of content where you can deactivate personal bubble features in order to have more intimate experiences. And Horizon is saying personal bubble is default across everything within their servers. It's going to affect everything that happens on those servers going forward. Heaney, how does this work compared to some of the things that we've seen on other platforms over the years?
Yeah, so a lot of platforms have this work where it's kind of on the client side, where if another person gets very close to you, they become invisible. But what Horizon is doing here is it's actually happening on the server side, where you physically just cannot get closer than 4 feet to others. So the idea is that it's almost like a collider that is around. It's as if like you're playing a very old video game where the collider box is, much wider than the actual character models. So as soon as you get anywhere near them, you can't get close. I like this idea for strangers, but I think you should be able to. I think how it should work is that as soon as you add someone as a friend, this should no longer apply. I actually think in social apps like this, there should be more than just one tier of friends list. If you look on Facebook and Instagram already, they have this concept of you have your friends and your close friends, and you can even make your own custom lists. And you can have like an Instagram story that only goes out to your close friends, or a Facebook post that only is seen by your close friends. I think there should be different tiers in social VR. So, say like you're talking about a performance that you're going to need to interact with the actors, you should be able to add them as a trusted person so you can get close to them, and then have your friends who can also get close to you but get information like where you currently are and can invite you to places. It just seems like a one size fits all approach isn't right here. But we should say that the reason that this is happening most likely is that there are media reports where journalists have gone in to Horizon Worlds and tried to find, the worst thing they could possibly find. And of course, they find, like in any social VR platform, like in any online multiplayer game, they find that there were people that would come very close to them and harass them and say inappropriate things. So this is a kind of snap reaction from Meta to deal with that as quickly as possible. And I noted that this was even covered in mainstream outlets like the BBC, just because of this concept of harassment in the metaverse and how to prevent that going forward.
Yeah, we've talked about this, I think, on an ongoing basis in lots of different contexts where presence in VR can have dramatically different effects on kind of what it means to have people with you in the same location. I noticed they use the term hand harassment measures in this document where they talked about these features. And one of if you move your hand too close to another person, your hand, I think, disappears if that happens. But of course, this becomes really interesting when we start talking about things like hand gestures, right? And the rude gestures you can make from very far away, and other things that you might get banned for in social spaces. The thing that I think is really interesting about Horizon is it debuted a couple years before this Facebook to Meta switchover. And now they're benefiting from the fact that you need your Facebook account to come into Horizon Worlds because it helps with management of trolls and people who are agitating your user base. If you want to zap a person off of your database, there's no almost better way right now than deleting their Facebook account and then setting up your AI watchdog to stop them from re-entering your account database. And Meta and Facebook could theoretically do that to anyone that really hurts you in your space. But do you think there's ever going to be a time when Horizon Worlds doesn't require your Facebook account? And how is that going to follow Meta through this transition, Heaney?
I think that's a great question because, as you mentioned, the ability to kind of tie your personal real identity through your Facebook account to your actions in spaces like this is what makes that moderation powerful, because on other platforms, people can just go and make another account. If you get banned, if something is free and you can make a free account to use it, you can just make another account if you get banned. There are some services that will do things like try to check your IP address, but if you restart your router, your ISP will give you a new IP address. So that's not going to work. There are other kind of potential hardware fingerprinting technologies where you can identify someone's unique headset, but there's going to be so many false positives and false negatives with that. But the disadvantage of the current approach is that it makes there we go. So I've actually heard from people who use Horizon Worlds that the moderators are extremely reluctant to actually act because of this. Because if they get something wrong, they've banned someone's Facebook account. And that's got a much higher cost than just being kicked out of a VR app. So I've heard that people go into Horizon and people are breaking the rules, harassing and saying inappropriate things, and the moderators just stand there and watch it and do absolutely nothing. So all this moderation strategy and all of these grand ideas of how to kind of make a social VR space acceptable don't really matter if the moderators aren't actually told to do something. But in general, I've always believed that the only way to have a consistently non-shady public social VR experience is active moderation. Just like in real life, if there was a bar that had absolutely no bouncers, what do you think is going to happen? I don't understand why people think there's going to be some magical self-policing spaces in the metaverse. I remember using Alt Space VR very early on, where they did have human moderators in almost every popular public space, and it actually, for people who are not the kind of people you want to be in a public space, they obviously hated it because they got banned. But for people who wanted to go there and just have a genuine conversation, and it actually made it a much more pleasant experience and helped make it a place where there were interesting conversations and even some kind of micro celebrities that would drop into these public spaces, but just because they knew that those moderators were actually there to make sure that nothing went horribly wrong.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see this at the other end of this, kind of like what's happening with Twitch and YouTube, where people that are very big on those platforms test the moderation strategies at like the very highest levels, right? How many weeks can I get banned for a copyright violation? As kind of like the end of what you're discussing there, where individuals are testing out these individual moderation policies, to see what happens with them. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens at the scale of billions of people, right? How do these things work when we're also using avatars, potentially, or maybe avatar clothing out with us walking around in the real world?
I think that is a huge unsolved problem in the visions of the metaverse that have been laid out. How do you possibly scale moderation to that level where public social experiences can work? I guess Meta will be hoping that they can, in the longer term, leverage AI and have some sort of artificial agents that try to moderate. But it seems like you would have to have a AI that has a brilliant understanding of social nuances and context that doesn't seem possible in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, see, the problem I have with that, Heaney, the thing that I'm sort of getting sort of stuck on is we're dealing with things like the Ray-Ban glasses that have this little light on them, and it has such a dramatic effect if you're a person who doesn't want to be tracked, right? To see that white light coming at you as a recorder. Lose it again. Um, it is a little bit of an invasion of your uh, day to suddenly be recorded in an instance where you didn't expect to be recorded. And it's going to be an ongoing thing over the coming years, how that actually works out over the scale. But like, Heaney, do you wear any augmented devices, any smart devices on a regular basis every day?
A smartwatch? Yeah, I would use a smartwatch.
Yeah. So smartwatches, of course, what Facebook and Meta are doing, and then there's benefits that are going to happen when you pair the smartwatch with your glasses and then your phone, and it all gets more powerful. But I still wonder about that camera system and going out in the real world and whether we're going to really live overlay things in the real world as we walk around. It still seems so far fetched to me, Heaney, and I have a hard time imagining I'm going to do it.
Yeah, there's significant privacy questions that are completely unanswered so far.
All right, what do we got next, Heaney?
I think we can go to the tracked keyboard SDK. I'll bring up the image. Maybe you can take some comments while I'm checking that.
Yeah, I use AirPods. I've got my AirPods Pro. I feel naked without them. I lost them as well. So I lost my AirPods on one trip and I lost my Ray-Ban glasses on another trip. And I'm thinking that's a good sign that the fact that I went to the step of replacing both of them seems like a good indication that both those categories of devices are going to be uh pretty popular in smart categories in the coming years. I mean, they're obviously already giant sources of revenue for Apple and others. But smart glasses, smart watch, and smart earbuds. Those are going to be the first three categories of wearables that are going to get really big over the next couple of years. And I want them to work with my track keyboard, right? Heaney, like, first off, uh, one of the things I'm confused about with this keyboard is, am I pairing it with the Quest nowadays to get this feature, or am I pairing it with a PC?
Well, before I say anything, I was going to say my takeaway from your story is you should be a lot more careful with where you place your expensive electronic devices if you're going to release them
Yeah,
that often.
fair. But they should.
That's
They
it's
all
the
need to have.
expensive.
Our commenter, one of our commenters, I think it was Onakazi, was suggesting I need to put an air tag on the Ray-Ban glasses, and then my problem is solved.
Exactly. Stick air tags on everything at this point if you can lose that stuff.
Yep.
That's wow, hundreds of dollars of stuff lost. Anyway, yes. So the last week, Meta released 2 SDKs for Quest. The first one you can see screenshots of the top here is the Interaction SDK, and the bottom one is the Tracked Keyboard SDK. And to answer your question, let's start with the Tracked Keyboard SDK. For a while now, you've been able to pair the Logitech K830 to your Quest 2, and you will see it in the Quest home environment, as you can see here, as a 3D model with your hands on top of it when you're typing on it. And it is positionally tracked, so if you move it to the other side of your table, that's where you'll see it. And it just means that you can actually really use your keyboard in VR to enter text, which, as anyone who is entered text without a real keyboard in VR will know, is going to be a game changer in terms of the kind of productivity apps that are possible, and even just any app where you regularly need to enter text. And it is paired to the Quest itself, not your PC. So this is something that happens standalone. A few weeks ago, they added support for another keyboard, the Apple Magic Keyboard. So there's now those 2 different keyboards that can track, but it hasn't been something that's been available to developers until now. It was available early in Horizon Workrooms because sometimes Meta gives itself these SDKs months and months in advance. But now that normal developers have access to it, we should be seeing in the coming months a wave of updates to apps like potentially Virtual Desktop, potentially Big Screen, potentially any app that you're entering text. And that really does change what's going to be possible on this platform, because a lot of the reasons that you still see mostly games and experiences on Quest is this lack of serious input, because you cannot do serious productivity work without a real keyboard.
It's interesting. I mean, he needs something simple like reskinning the ASD keys as arrows. Like, is that something that we could see in a, given context of, doing like a Doom emulator or some simple game from a decade ago? Like, can we also do that with these overlays?
Yeah, so there's an option in the SDK as to whether the keys are overlaid onto the keyboard itself, and so that's only as in terms of actual text, just so you can see it more clearly. But there's no reason that you as a developer couldn't take those keys and overlay them. That is a very interesting idea, actually, that based on the game you're going to use, you then kind of have this surface for infinite different types of inputs, or you're not infinite as many keys as there are on a keyboard.
Well, the reason I'm thinking in particular, Heaney, I mean, you've already got built into this studio the ability to hit a couple keys over on the keyboard to go to different cameras. I would love to be able to see icons on cameras on 1, 2, 3, and 4 keys for each of the cameras. And I've got the same thing. That's what it's the Stream Deck. It's the same functionality as the Stream Deck, not the Steam Deck, but you've done it with this Track Keyboard API and your existing programming in Unity.
Yeah, I think I saw a few years ago that there was a very expensive keyboard that had little screens on some of the keys to allow that, but obviously that's impractical cost-wise. So with VR and AR, you get this feature that is genuinely extremely useful, but for free, as long as the headset can do it. All you're doing is rendering icons onto a model. It's not something that costs anymore. So that's actually, you're right in saying that it actually could make keyboards more useful than they currently are in VR, not less. Should we talk about the other SDK, the Interaction
Yeah,
SDK?
sure.
So this is actually, in my opinion, one of the most significant developer releases Meta has given in years, perhaps ever. And I've heard from developers that have been trying this out over the past week that this could be a genuine game changer for the platform. And let's see if I have the information here. Yeah. So this Interaction SDK means that developers no longer have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to common interactions like grabbing things, putting an object from one hand into the other, doing detections of gestures with your hands, building 2-dimensional floating interfaces, and all of the other common interactions that you want to do in VR, where you want to make buttons, you want to make levers, you want to make doors. All of these things until now, you've either had to do it yourself as a developer or buy a framework on the Unity asset store or Unreal store that does it for you. But none of those frameworks so far have really been all encompassing. Some of them don't really play nice with each other. Sometimes they don't update in time for new system features. Some of them only support controllers rather than hand tracking. And in general, what Meta is trying to do here is just release something that's much more polished and has a much wider potential range of use cases than some of those very specific assets. And if what I've been hearing so far from developers is accurate, this is going to mean that new developers coming into VR and AR can build high quality hand interactions into their games much more easily than they could before. And that'll reduce the amount of time it takes for these apps to be built, and also mean that more apps have higher quality standardization. Because sometimes you go into this great VR gamer app and everything's great except you go to pick something up and they've just done things a little bit wrong, and it feels wrong compared to the best games that have physics and hand interactions.
This is really interesting, Heaney. I mean, are you going to be able to implement this here in the studio, and how is that going to affect things like, I mean, not to be mean or anything, but like it is not fun to interact with these touch buttons on these tablets, or like to have my hand pass through the surface of the tablet. Is this interaction SDK going to have any kind of an effect on that specific part of this experience?
So I think the main issue when it comes to something like a virtual tablet is still the fact that you have no haptics on hand tracking and you're interacting with a surface that doesn't exist. So your hand passes through it because it feels obvious to say, but because in real life there is nothing there. So there's always going to be kind of those kind of issues. But could we integrate some of the 2D UI parts of the interaction SDK? Sure, we could look into it and see whether that would help things. But where this is really going to make the biggest difference is in not apps like this that are just about kind of talking and showing image content, but in apps that are really about using your hands to interact with objects. And that's where VR kind of is at its most magic, and where it can do things and create experiences that traditional screens just can't do. Because there are some games on 2D platforms where you walk around and use your mouse to click and pick up something, but it's just a completely different world to really pick up something with one hand and pick up something with another hand, and attach the head of a sword to the handle, and all of these kind of things that are just impossible in normal gaming and very hard for VR developers to build. But from here, less of a challenge.
Yeah, so I think the thing we talked about internally, Heaney, was Toybox. So, several years ago, at some of the earliest demos of the Oculus Touch controllers, they demoed this Toybox experience where you had kind of like an Oculus demo person in a room very near you, and you went into VR and did some hand interactions with these controllers, and there was a guide in a room right near you in VR represented as one of those weird neon old avatars that Facebook used to have. And they could interact with you and play with some of these physics objects in the space with you. If you start layering in things like resizing and scale of one of those two people in the room, you can have a really, really fun experience with just two people sharing a physics heavy space together. But we haven't seen any of, very many of those examples pop up in multiplayer VR over the last couple of years. Is that because they were lacking this kind of tool set to build on, Heaney?
So when it comes to multiplayer, that is a completely different realm of difficulty. Making something that has high quality hand interactions in a single player experience, and even physics like we see in Boneworks and The Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners, that's hard. But once you start getting to multiplayer, it's not really the hand interactions that become the hard part. It's synchronizing that physics. And in most 2D games, the physics that's being synchronized across a network are kind of very deterministic or simplistic, or kind of act on such a large scale that even when there's minor desynchronizations, it'll all kind of work out on the grand scale of things. But in VR, when you have lots of different objects that are very close to you and being manipulated very precisely, and then they have to interact with physics, with each other, and with the world, and with gravity, it becomes an incredibly difficult network synchronization problem. And I don't actually think we've really seen any app or game solve this yet. We haven't seen the boneworks of multiplayer or the Walking Dead Saints and Sinners of multiplayer yet. And I don't think this is going to be what changes that fundamentally. It will be better physics engine. It'll be, sorry, a better physics engines and better network programmers and things like, it'll be an issue that is more to do with physics and networking than it is to do with the actual hand interactions. And I'm sure whoever does it will be someone who spends, all day, every day working on an app for years that finally solves this problem, because it is, from what I understand from the developers that work on this, it is extraordinarily hard to pull off what you're suggesting.
Interesting. There's simple things like just the release of a ball, right, from a hand and figure out exactly when that should be. There's things like Totally Baseball, that baseball game where like you have a cannon in your hand in place of a ball throwing mechanic because they cannot figure out when to release the object, and then syncing up that releasing between two different systems. It's just got to make so many game ideas non-starters when you can't get that done correctly. Andrew King had a question for you, Heaney. Do you know if the Oculus Quest browser will get plugin support? Some productivity users use something like LastPass to manage their passwords. Have you heard anything there?
I haven't. It's a good question, because add-ons are kind of essential to a lot of browser-based productivity flows. As far as I understand, it is based on Chromium. So in the same way that Microsoft brought existing Chrome extensions to Edge through shifting their browser engine to Chromium, it shouldn't require extensions to be completely remade. It's just a matter of, when does Meta consider that high enough priority to build it into their browser. I can confidently say that if we're sitting here 3 or 5 years from now, the answer is going to be yes. But the question is just, when does it get to the point of their priority list that it actually gets done?
Mm. Do you have anything else on the news list to get to today, Heaney?
Let me double check, because there's been quite a lot of news this week. There's actually been probably the most news topics we've ever had in one show. So let me just quickly check my other notes here to make sure we haven't missed anything major yet.
Yeah, let us know if you've got any comments out there, and go check out the Between Realities podcast from last week with Kyle on there talking about the correspondent program. We've got a lot of news that we published over the weekend, and of course, go back and watch the Gamescast to see Jamie and Harry talking about the latest games in VR. It is, things are popping up on us unexpectedly all the time now, it seems, with VR games, because it doesn't seem like it doesn't always make sense to promote a VR game months and months in advance. So it seems like we're getting some games that almost get announced and then released a couple weeks later. And Jamie and Harry are really keeping up with that.
So yeah, we've got 2 more things we can discuss today. There is PlutoSphere, and then there is Tobii's announcement today. Which one should we go for first?
Let's go with Tobii. It's not Tobii. I'm gonna keep saying Tobii, Heaney.
I think it is Tobii. I feel like I knew this a few months ago, but somehow I've forgotten.
Tobii makes sense. I mean,
I'll tell you why I've forgotten is because at CS I heard both of those pronunciations by so many people that I actually forgot myself which one is the right one. But I don't think it really matters. What matters is that they are saying that they are in negotiations with Sony to be the eye tracking provider for PlayStation VR2.
Yes, this is kind of a big one. Tobii is the company that I've had demos of for many years now, and they're the ones that I come back to. If you haven't had this demo, it is extremely hard for you to grasp, almost literally, the before and after that eye tracking will have to your VR experience. So if you have Tobii's eye tracking really tuned in and synced up to your eyes, and you're looking at a field with a bunch of objects to throw a ball at, you can throw a ball at a bunch of vases sitting on posts on the other side of the field and reliably hit like 15 or 20 objects scattered throughout that field with every single throw of your arm. That's something I cannot reliably do with current generation VR technology, and it's something that would overnight change something like Half-Life Alyx and the ability to gravity glove objects in the near field around you. Heaney, what do we make of this particular news that Tobii puts this out, saying that they are in negotiations with Sony?
Yeah, so I think as a lot of people have been pointing out, the weird thing here is why are they still in negotiations? Why are negotiations still ongoing this late? We're in February. Sony has announced the product. They have announced the full specifications. They have announced the first game, and they've even opened they've opened notifications for the pre-order system so that when pre-orders go up, you can put your email in right now, and whenever that happens, you'll be told. So it seems very, very late in the game to be still in negotiations with a supplier of such a core technology, because as you remember, on the specifications of PlayStation VR2, eye tracking and foveated rendering were listed. Sony could have chosen to wait a while to release these specifications. They could have been vague. They could have said there are more specifications yet to come, but they have very specifically put that on their spec list. And so, as we've said in our article, and if you go to uploadvr.com right now, you can read it. There's an optimistic potential here, which is just that these two companies are sorting out the pricing. They're sorting out the kind of deal, the exact terms of the deal, and how much percentage of each sale Tobii gets from Sony. But the other possibility here, as we've pointed out in the article, is that we know that Sony has been working on eye tracking since at least 2014. We've seen eye tracking show up in Sony's patent filings for years now. We know that other divisions of Sony, including the camera division, have some eye tracking technology and specialists who work on that. So, is it possible that Sony was intending to use its own in house eye tracking technology, but in the last phases of user testing, in preparation for mass production, realized that it wasn't quite up to the task? And by that I mean, eye tracking is one of those things where, because everyone's eyes are ever so slightly different, the more and more of the population you want to cover, the harder it gets exponentially. So even Tobii, who's been in this industry for 2 decades, the eye tracking industry, to be clear, say that even with their latest technology, they're only promising that it will work properly to the point of being able to be used for foveated rendering for 95 to 98% of people. So that means that you're leaving out between 2 and 5% of the population who, when they use this, will not get the same eye tracking quality. So they may miss some of those throws that Ian was talking about, or they may notice that the foveated rendering change resolution because it just isn't able to keep up with their eye perfectly. Sony may have found that their in-house technology only covered 80% of people or 90% of people. And that's something you wouldn't really find out until you start doing very wide scale user testing. And it's an example of where VR and AR is different from conventional consumer electronics, in that because it's so directly relating to your perceptual systems, the differences between people become more and more important. And that's obviously another factor in comfort as well, because people's heads are all differently shaped. When it comes to visuals and optics, people's eyes are at a different distance apart. So all of these kind of things mean that sometimes very late in a product's life, you might find that the technology path you've gone down isn't appropriate. And again, this is only our speculation. This could be complete nonsense, but it's very possible that Sony at the last minute realized that it's going to need to bring in the experts, i.e. Tobii, to provide this eye tracking at the quality they want to do foveated rendering in games.
Yeah, so we've got this comment from Valdarg basically asking whether the news that they're in negotiations could be outdated, that by the time this got out to us, it was actually already a done deal. The thing that, to be clear, this was a press release posted by this company today, and there's a line in their documentation where they basically suggest this was because of regulatory reasons that they actually had to come out and make this notification. So there is that possibility there that they kind of just had to do this for reasons, and this has been actually been in the works for a while. But it is such an odd thing to kind of have come out of nowhere. And he and I were kind of talking about Apple, a company at Apple's scale tries to dual source critical components, and so that they can't be that the price of their product can't be dictated by a single component provider. If someone tries to price them too much, they can go to the other provider and place a bigger order. Um, but I don't know if that's going to be the case here with eye tracking because of what you're talking about, Heaney, where if foveated rendering isn't working at 99% plus percentage, it may not necessarily be useful as a system-wide feature. Like maybe you could get some better user experience features when it actually accurately tracks your eye movements. But foveated rendering, where you've got to show the resolution at the highest fidelity, exactly where the eye is pointed at any given moment, that could start to feel weird if it's not actually operating correctly, couldn't it?
Yeah, Tobii really is the only option here for a company like Sony. If you're not aware, Tobii's technology is already used in the Vive Pro I. It's used in the HP Reverb G2 Omnicept edition. It's used in the Pico headsets, which have eye tracking, which is the Pico Neo 2i and the Pico Neo 3 Pro I. Gotta love those long product names. But they've demonstrated that they can ship technology in real headsets. They are, as far as I'm aware, the only third party that will do this. There are companies that have done their own eye tracking, but these are companies like Vario and Xtal that are, they're not in any way positioned to provide a company like Sony with this technology. That they don't even have a licensing system for something like that. But Tobii really does become the only option there. It's to some of the questions about, was this an old press release? I don't think so, because it said on at the very bottom, this information was submitted for publication on February 7th, which is today. So given that it was released according to this press release, because it's a regulatory requirement, they have to make clear when they are in negotiations with a company at this scale, they have to tell investors, because they are a publicly traded company on a European stock market, and this is a European regulatory requirement. I don't think they're being deceptive here. I don't think this deal has already been struck. I think they truly, really are in negotiations. The question is just, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does it mean for the timing of the PlayStation VR efforts? The thing that I sort of think long term, Heaney, is what is Sony's strategy beyond this wired system, right? So, are they going to go back to square one in many ways once they get past the PSVR2 in order to go standalone, and how much effort is required to catch up to where Meta will be when they actually get that product on the market? And I don't know, it goes back to what kind of partners and homegrown equipment Sony's actually able to bring to bear, or whether, I always wonder if a company like Tobii is going to get acquired by one of the major ones out there, since they seem to be such a dependent, such an important supplier.
Yeah, well, we know that Meta has actually acquired a few eye tracking companies in the past, the companies that would have maybe gone on to be Tobii's competitors. So, while obviously it's unlikely that Meta is then going to come around and even be able to acquire another eye tracking company, let alone want to, you're right that they are a valid acquisition target by companies, including, if this partnership goes well, potentially Sony itself. This will, as far as I'm aware, and I think I'm safe to say this, almost certainly be Tobii's largest deal ever by far. The Vive Pro I and the Pico headsets are just not the same scale as this at all. We This idea that you're bringing up of, will Sony go in future to a more generalized standalone headset rather than just releasing a PlayStation division headset, is a good question. It's something that will happen eventually. I think it's safe to say, if VR and AR does take off, a company like Sony is not going to not want to have a product there. And we've seen some job listings that suggest that that's something that they're starting to explore. But it kind of comes back to the news we were talking about before, where what would be the software platform? And this is the problem with a lot of ideas of Quest competitors: running what software, running what store, using what content. And that's what Microsoft seem to, according to that report we were discussing earlier, want to be the missing link for. So maybe in the same way that Samsung could reportedly be releasing a Microsoft powered headset, maybe a few years down the line, Sony has the same, where you're using a Sony headset powered by Microsoft mixed reality. It's but I think we're too early to really talk about that. It's obviously the very early days, and this is going to be Sony's first serious VR AR product. In my opinion,
Mm.
PSVR1 was just a beta test for them.
Interesting perspective there. And I will be really curious to see the controllers. The controllers are the missing link here, in addition to the headset, of course. But I need to feel those controllers in my hand with a couple games built for those controllers and see where Sony really stacks up. And I like OP Czar's comment here. Imagine getting frustrated with non reliable eye tracking. It would be absolutely maddening within seconds. And
Yeah.
that's why we really can't have it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why eye tracking can add all of these benefits to a headset, but the problem is that there is going to be a few percentage of people for whom it's just not going to work. And that's one of the reasons. The fact that eye tracking is so sensitive and the outliers are so hard for this technology to work with is the reason that I have begun to speculate about this potential that it could have been Sony's in-house tech that wasn't able to get out, because it's a long list. It's another one of those long list of things in technology that it's a lot harder to get the last 10% than it is to do the first 90%. The first 90, it's
Mm.
like self-driving cars as well. You can get a self-driving car that can be 95% of the way of where it needs to be in a few months these days. But to get that last 5%, that's where it starts to go into years and years and potentially even decades
Well,
of
yeah, it doesn't
difficulty.
really. When you're talking about the math of like 99%, efficiency on some of these AI systems, it doesn't really like that sounds impressive, but you have to remember that every one of the remaining percentages is a real person, a real human life, and multiple human lives, depending on the circumstances. In a case like self-driving cars, uh, there could be multiple people out there in vehicles that are going to get slammed into by an AI that's only 99% effective. And so those are the types of things that really need to be taken into account, and why these companies are setting thresholds so far above 99% as their threshold for actually rolling out these things in significant ways. Heaney, what's our last news? We should get into that.
PlutoSphere, you covered
Oh,
this with an interview
PlutoSphere.
last week.
Yeah, so that was a cool little experiment here. We actually had Forrest from PlutoSphere into our studio to break that news live with these avatars. You can go and check out PlutoSphere. Basically, Heaney, you tried this out a year ago now, and they've been working on this in sort of a private, invite-only way for that entire time to get this ready where you can have basically a PC in the cloud. You don't actually have to own your own PC. You go and rent out time on a VR PC in the cloud and pay for it with the same kind of system that you would if you went to an arcade. So if you think of an 80s arcade, and the way you take tokens and go into that arcade with $1, let's say, and pay for an hour on a machine, and then you get to play that machine for that length of time. That's the model that PlutoSphere has chosen to go with pricing these things out. And they said that they're trying to aim for the range of about $1 to $3 per hour in order to enjoy PC VR games. Heaney, what do you think of all these developments?
So like you said, I did try PlutoSphere a year back. I was actually very impressed by their technology. The latency was incredibly low. It wasn't any significantly higher than it would be if you're using something like virtual desktop from your PC. A lot of people don't realize that the last the what really adds latency to wirelessly streaming VR isn't the network transport layer. That's not the part that's actually the biggest addition. It's the compression and decompression of the image. It's the fact that to send a really high resolution image over the internet like this, it has to be compressed on one side, and then your headset has to decompress it. And each of those steps takes a little bit of time. So if the, PlutoSphere is running on AWS, where the idea is that they hope to have a server in your city, or if you don't live in a city, you're near a city. And if you are in one of those ideal positions where you are close enough to one of these servers, the actual latency from your home to that server is not going to be the significant aspect. So the real problem is of course, the pricing. $1 to $3 an hour is not horrific, but it's really not low enough yet to where it's going to be something that's compelling for people to use at scale. Although, given that they're going to be able to roll this out very slowly, AWS doesn't have a huge amount of graphics card servers on it yet. This is probably going to work to their advantage, where this is going to be something that I don't see this growing very rapidly. It'll grow at a steady pace as they build out the technology and the network and the business use cases, and the kind of figure out what pricing really works for people. But it really does need to fill this gap, in that there are going to be lots of people with standalone headsets who never want to own a gaming PC, but would really love to try some of the PC VR content, including even just VR chat in its full without the kind of uh, degraded avatars and reduced experience. And of course, the big flagship PC games like Skyrim VR and Half-Life Alyx, and even potentially something like Flight Simulator in future.
Yeah, so we talked about VR chat quite a bit, and I think VR chat ends up being kind of the most interesting piece of content to talk about this particular market proposition. Where um, I'm remembering Mark Zuckerberg a couple years ago at Oculus Connect coming out on stage and saying, the biggest trend, in his opinion, in transportation is that it's cheaper to move things from place to place using ones and zeros than it is to like physically move things from place to place. That was like kind of he had some clever way of talking about it in his
Atoms and
actual
bits.
keynote. Um, yeah, moving bits instead of atoms being this key thing. Uh, the thing that I think is interesting here is this idea that if you wanted to have a night out on the town, you're going to go and spend, depending on what kind of a night on the town it is, maybe $60 to $100 on a dinner, hundreds of dollars more if you go to a really fancy restaurant and get a lot of alcohol. There's movie, which could be $20 to $40. There's the gas that it actually takes to get you to your location and back. There's all those things, those costs that it takes to actually go out and have a night out in a physical town, versus maybe paying a couple dollars in order to see everyone's avatar at their full fidelity for a couple hours. And I'm not saying that anyone is actually going to actually do that math out there in the real world, but it does kind of establish this difference in um, value, right? Like there's a certain the point that Forrest was talking about with me was, isn't that worth it to some people to go and have the best view of everyone's avatar and the best view of a particular VR chat world for a special occasion?
Yeah, it really is a question of, as VR becomes more immersive and as these experiences become more compelling that are only available on a PC or a PlayStation, the value of the value will increase. And over time, eventually it will get to the point where millions and millions of people say, I would spend this few dollars an hour to get these experiences. But I don't think we're yet at the point where most PC VR content is that compelling that it would really justify that. But there are going to be people out there who have a great internet connection, live in a city, have a Quest 2, have no desire for a PC, and this is exactly what they're looking for. So it's only going to be a good thing. But I actually suspect that a lot of people who try this maybe will end up eventually buying their own PC over the long period of time, because it may be something where once you actually see what's out there, you want to get it for your own and actually own it, rather than just
Mm.
continuing to rent in the longer term. Because as Anakazi points out here, the amount that he has played Elite Dangerous means that it would have cost him between $500 and $1,500 if he was playing it through PlutoSphere. So eventually, if you do start to like it enough, the economics will make sense to get your own PC. But especially right now, when the graphics card market is still so distorted and graphics cards are still so difficult to get and so expensive, this could be a unique time where something like PlutoSphere is a lot more valuable than it usually would be.
I was talking to Forrest, and I actually cut this from my interview, but I kind of asked him. He said he was really sensitive to simulator sickness as well, and that's the thing that gets me. And my bar for him was, do you go into Half-Life Alyx with teleport turned on and feel pretty comfortable? And he said, absolutely yes. And that for me is the bar. If I go into teleport with Half-Life Alyx and I feel comfortable and can play that for an hour to two, that's going to be on par with what I can do locally with Half-Life Alyx. And we have yet to do that kind of extensive testing, but we do want to get in there and really see if the streaming service can hold up when you've got, I think it's a 50 megabit per second connection, plus the latest Wi-Fi you can possibly get for your actual router. And then, of course, your distance to the server is going to dictate that as well.
Yeah, that last link, the actual what kind of router do you have and how close are you to it, is one of the biggest factors of it all when it comes to the real reliability of the experience, when it comes to how many drop frames and how much jutter you're going to see. Over time, as Wi-Fi 6 becomes more popular and as people are able to get access points out there, it's obviously going to be a lot more compelling. I still want to see Meta release a kind of actual streaming stick so you can stream from your PC directly to your headset without going through your local network. And I'd love to see in the longer term someone like PlutoSphere release something that lets you very easily bring your Wi-Fi connection into another room with Wi-Fi 6, something that plugs into a wall and uses power line to connect to your router, or some sort of other cabled or very specific device, because I do think that's still going to be the weakest aspect of all of these cloud streaming systems and of virtual desktop and Airlink. The fact that most families do not have their router right beside the largest open area where you would likely be playing VR. And if there is a wall between you and the router, or it's just on the other side of the house, it's no wireless VR is going to be a good experience that goes through your local network.
Any other comments there that we should respond to, Heen, or anything else we need to wrap up here?
Just going to respond to Artful comment. So Quest 2 does support Wi-Fi 6. The confusing part here about Wi-Fi is that despite Wi-Fi 6 having the number 6 in it, it is not the 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. What you're probably referring to there, Artful, is Wi-Fi 6E, which is the new Wi-Fi which has a 6 gigahertz band. And that will be a lot more useful for things like VR streaming, as long as you're in the same room as the router, because it will allow for higher bandwidth connection that's stronger. But the trade-off with 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi is, again, if there's a wall between you and it, or there's distance, it's going to be even worse than current Wi-Fi. So that it really is just about the proliferation of Wi-Fi access points that are beside your VR play space. Meowmix is suggesting that the Cambria charging dock could double as a dedicated Airlink router. That is a very interesting idea. And even if it doesn't make it into Cambria, I'm sure at some point some company will realize that, because
isn't there a patent to support that use? I think there's a patent to cover some of that that very same use case.
Yeah, we saw a patent application a few years ago for Meta, and to be clear, companies file patent applications for all sorts of random things all the time, and maybe 1%, if even, of these ideas ever make it into a real product ever. But one thing we did see in a patent application was a charging case for a headset that had the computing hardware in it. And so you would put the headset in to charge, and when you took it out, it would create a wireless connection between the case and the headset, where the processing's done in the case with maybe a Steam Deck like GPU, and then streamed over to the headset, which has a very basic processor that just kind of does tracking and decompresses the image. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. And
yeah, well, I think that's it for us. I'm looking at James' comments here asking about the specs of their cloud PCs and how it can run Half-Life Alyx. We're going to need to get in there and actually do some stress testing before we can really give any real impressions. They were basically just on our show to announce that it was actually live on SideQuest, and you could go and side load all of this and some of the obvious questions that new users are going to have about that. And I was joking with them in the studio, like, are your servers going to melt tomorrow? Given that, like, that's kind of the standard practice now for anything in VR, is to have their servers melt on launch day. But I haven't, I'm hearing in our comments people are trying to get in, and they're obviously still an evolving service, early access. So I don't know, if it doesn't work for you now, maybe come back to it later. The thing that we do recommend always is if you start to feel uncomfortable in VR for any reason, take a break. leave VR, especially if it's related to movement. Like if you're using a stick to move around in VR and then you feel discomfort, don't try to push through that. Take the headset off, take a break. And that's especially true with PlutoSphere as well. Go check out Between Realities. Alex and Skiva with Kyle did an example post of our new correspondent program. We'll have a lot more on that in the future. We've got our Gamescast that should be back on Thursday, and then come back on Mondays, where should be David Heaney and I for the next few weeks as we test out this format. Tell your friends, like, comment, subscribe, bring your questions about VR. We love answering questions from new VR users, getting them up to speed. Make sure they save money, don't waste time out there in virtual reality. So thank you so much. We'll see you in the future, and tune in next week.
Thanks so much for everyone watching. Again, we love the quality of your comments. Please come back next week because we love discussing VR technology with you.